We are going to hit on something super important in today's age. So it is a little bit crazy out there. Many of you would agree. And it has been for some time now, probably since 2020, where it really escalated, where decision making has been not so easy, and also more awareness around our decisions. So it's exciting at the same time that it is scary. So what do I mean by decision making? I mean, we are having more and more in our face people in charge, whether it is a government institution or education system, teachers, whatever, wherever we're getting our information, the news media, telling us some things to believe and trying to help us make decisions about our lives, where there may actually be underlying agenda. So what I wanted to hop on and talk about in this video is, how do you make sure that when you're making decisions about anything, that it's coming from a place of sovereignty, meaning it's inside of you. It's a decision that is independent, allowing free thinking, critical brain, what is independently right for you, which may not be right for the person next to you, but being able to feel comfortable enough to think through or evaluate all of the information and then come up with a decision on your own. So the consequences of making a decision outside of authenticity are so vast. And I would tell you, having run a primary care and integrative medicine practice for 25 years, I see patients every single day, and I will count myself in that, who have made decisions based on expectations. So expectations of family, expectations of society, expectations of what themselves really too, right? Like, oh, I'm supposed to do this. So this is the classic patient will come in, they had a lot of stress in the home, and I'm one of the only practitioners that starts at the beginning, and I ask about the home environment. Why? Because if you grew up in a home where, let's say you had a controlling parent on either side and you had to walk on eggshells, that is the classic. And controlling could mean anything from just ridiculously high expectations and sort of helicopter parenting all the way to like alcoholism and actual abuse. In that environment where you shut down and you don't want to make waves and you want to make sure everybody's happy because you're like overly gifted in that divine feminine of empathy, right? And by overly gifted, if it stays too far, always over this way, in the divine feminine, you can check out the other video that I made on that, then you're going to end up in trouble because you don't know how to find that balance again, and you just continue self-sacrificial behavior. So those of you and those of my patients that I see every day who have had that scenario where they're trying to play small when it comes to decisions, and it could be a decision from, do I respond to this text, to do I want to date this person, to should I go work at this company, to, literally, should I invest in something? All these decisions at any moment in time, when we come up with them, we're relying predominantly on our minds. And remember, our minds have been relatively controlled. So that's the part I want you to see, right? We have control because of outside circumstances and agendas, where everything from big food, big pharma, big everything that wants us in a certain state to be compliant, wants us to eat poorly because it's convenient and relatively inexpensive compared to healthy food. So we're going to make this choice. Well, I see it on TV. I see it in all of these other places. What could be so bad, right? That's some of the mental, I call it mental masturbation, but it's that mental control that we are surrendering over. And again, a lot of times it's to ourselves and our own self-judgment. But when you have a decision to make, can you stop and see how it's being influenced? The biggest example too in 2020 was that of whether or not people were going to get an injection. And so I saw and observed that, and at that time held space for everyone, because I had so many people who felt the need to move forward based on what they were hearing. And if that is you, it's all perfect. Everything can be detoxed and removed. But what I'm begging you to do is let go of the self-judgment for having made that decision, because now you can take your experience and say, where else have I done that in my life? Where else have I agreed to something where maybe my intuition or my critical brain was saying, this doesn't feel totally appropriate, right? This feels off. And that's where we can talk briefly now about your heart energy and your energy field. So we have an energy field. We have a physical vessel and we have an energy field. The energy field goes out for many feet outside of our body. And what's really interesting is the energy field walks into the room before we do. We are constantly sensing our environment, bringing information in and providing it to our brain. And the brain is kind of digesting, interpreting, and then sending messages out. And so far, for as far back, at least several hundred years, we have been programmed to think that the brain is where it's at. The mind knows everything. And this is how we have to process. And we just have to calm our mind. And if we could just have a clear mind. And I am doing a lot of deep research in the fact that the heart is where the answers are. So it turns out our heart, and by the way, there's a really interesting book that just came out in 2024 called The Curious History of the Heart, talking about how in ancient cultures, the heart was where it was at. Like that was where everybody focused for where the soul was, emotions, knowledge, intellect, and the brain was sort of more like a computer receiver. And sometime during these past several hundred years, that got flipped. And the heart became a pump, and the brain became where everything was. And I want to intrigue you, kind of give you some food for your critical brain, that if we go back to what we knew several hundred years ago, when they, by the way, would donate the heart to the gods, that was what they did. And by the way, also, another interesting point is that Chinese medicine and meridians don't have the brain as a flow. Many of the other organs, but not the brain, which is very, very interesting. So when we're in our decision making, what would happen if we got rid of the chatter, the judgment, and we went instead into an intuitive, heart-based space? That's what I want you to think about. So if, for example, right, you've all had those experiences where you just felt like, I really don't think I should go there today. And then you hear something happened. Or, there are many stories like back with 9/11 of people that were meant to be in the building and then they trusted their intuition, or something came up and they didn't go with their brain, they went with their heart or their knowing, and they avoided catastrophe. So if you are somebody in your day-to-day environment and you're ready to kind of repair your decision-making capacity, repair your critical brain, work on independence and sovereignty, make sure you understand concepts like mass projection. So mass projection is a scenario where if there is enough fear and confusion and just anger and lack in the masses, that you can give them something to project that onto. And so the perfect example was during the pandemic, it became, here is sort of like the chalice of the pandemic, and you can just dump whatever you want in there. So all that fear, frustration that people had in themselves and in their lives was able to be projected onto the pandemic. And it ended up allowing people to not work on themselves. They were able to just say, like, stay closed down, really isolated, hide behind masks, blame everything on what was going on. And then they could watch the media and get just really hooked on that and live their life that way. And we found a lot of people get really sick because of that, anxiety levels, suicide rates, obviously fighting within families, so much so that it has to make you wonder, what is the purpose behind getting everybody this scared? What is the purpose behind the media and mass projection and fear-based control? And honestly, it's division, and it's having people be divided, because we are so much stronger when we come together as a community. So when we're divided and we're fighting over politics or religion or race or who has one thing versus who doesn't have it, and you need a card and all of that, when we're fighting amongst ourselves, we are controllable. We will make decisions that can be controlled by some agenda. So now that we've kind of had some time pass, many people have gone back and regretted their decisions that they made during that time. And I tell every one of my patients, do not regret a thing. You did what was best for you at that moment with the information that you could process. Moving forward, I believe this has been an experience that's amazing for everyone, because now we're having more things pop up in different ways, whether it's storms or wars or ridiculous politics. So what decisions can you do differently? So can you find in yourself sovereignty where you feel like everything makes sense? You feel it in your heart. Can you step out of the mental looping? Can you step out of the programming of your family and society? Feel what feels good for you and start verbalizing it and practicing it, because I guarantee you, you are not the only one that's feeling this way. So the answer to control and manipulation is community that thinks independently. But when we think independently and we feel better and we have our cup is full, then we can reach out and help others so much easier. Plus, when you make decisions that are based on your heart and they're not controlled and they're not fear-based, you're giving permission to those around you. So you can actually step into your divine masculine. And again, if you didn't hear that video, go back to my prior video on divine masculine and feminine. Step into that actionable place where it could just be, the action is, no, I'd rather not go to that restaurant. I would like to go here instead. That's where it starts. Baby steps, things you wouldn't have said before because you didn't want to rock the boat, because you didn't want to upset somebody, because you had watched your mom treat her kids that way and you were treated that way, and that's just the way you assume it's supposed to be. Well, we are incredible beings. We also adapt with our environment as the environment adapts. And we've seen that fear just lowers our frequency, makes us out of our critical brain. And there's a lot of science behind this, where with mass projection and with fear and control, we end up losing our critical brain and we go into our amygdala. So not only are we not in our hearts, but we're even in the more primal part of our brain where the critical processing is gone. So we're stuck in these loops that could be ancestral. They could be prior life, ancestral, stuck in our DNA. And we may want to change, but we're not going to be able to do that if our cellular and primal responses are staying stuck. So there are ways, there's a lot of different programs, things to do to get your body out of that are simple. One of the easiest is literally just tapping, and you can tap there's lots of different spots you can do. You can look up freedom technique, emotional freedom technique with tapping, and you'll find lots of info on that. but even just changing your state, jumping up and down, turning on music, kind of getting back in your body, like we said, which will bring back in that flow and intuition, then make your decision. So the next time that decision comes up, again, whether it's do I get this next jab all the way to where do I want to go for dinner, you're going to be coming from a place of empowerment. You're going to be coming from sovereignty. It's not going to be controlling. It's going to be leading. You are going to help be a part of the answer. So as we watch, and we're all kind of nervous, unclear as to what's coming next. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's kind of how I'll leave you with this video, is that I think today, more than ever, one of the main powers, ninja powers, which I like to talk about going from being reactive into being an observer and being neutral. But then you have to move from that into being the change. And there is a Japanese statement or quote that's shu ha ri that I love. It's hanging actually in my office. And shu is learn and obey the rules. That's the first step. You are going to be on this planet. You're going to learn and you're going to obey. This could be when you were a kid, you know, before you realized you had the power to break them. That's first. That's the shu. Then many of you may be in the ha. The ha is exciting. It's when we break the rules. Well, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Or I am not going to comply because I see through what's going on, because I am no longer being manipulated in my decision making by your control. But the real beauty for humanity is the re, and this is where we create new ones. So we have the power as human beings on this planet to create our own reality. But we have to live from a space that is outside of programming, that is connected to source, to the highest version of ourselves, that does not listen to the needs of the desperate needs and control of the environment. So that would be where I want you to do your homework when you have decisions, right? Check in, are you obeying the rules? And then start thinking, how can I mix this up a little bit? How can I go from sort of reacting into just observing and doing new things? Can I go into observing so that my body is not going on a ride when I start voicing my opinions? So let's say I make the decision and I say no. No, I'm not going to go to Thanksgiving dinner at Uncle John's at Uncle John's because he drinks too much and I'm uncomfortable. I guess Jan could be a guy or a girl. But maybe you make that decision, I'm not going to go, because you're finally listening to what feels good in your vessel. Well, then here comes Aunt Molly and all the cousins and maybe your parents, and they are going to be spinning like the hurricane, reacting. The first step after you make that healthy decision is learning how to stay in neutrality while everybody else reacts around you. That takes practice. So don't judge yourself. Start with baby decisions. Move up to bigger and bigger ones. Watch how they feel easier. And then start making the rules yourself. Create the new future, the new reality. We need leaders, we need more light workers, we need people leading people out of the dark. And this time on the planet is literally for that. So when you work on you, when you go inside into your micro environment and you take each decision and you make it sovereign and you sit in your heart and out of your programs, every time you do that, you're leading yourself, you're showing an example for other people how they can act for themselves, And you're going to create more and more energy that will lead and spill over into the environment around you so that your community can come together. And the micro is what leads to the macro, and that is how we are going to change the planet. So think of your decisions that way. Check in on the divine masculine and feminine. Check into whether or not you're learning and obeying the rules, breaking them, or creating them. And remember to stay sovereign, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.